Warm and joyful greetings to you all today. Welcome to Nurture the Soul. I'm your host, Tracy Howe, team leader and minister for faith, education, innovation, and formation, Faith Info for short. We are part of Justice and Local Church Ministries at the national setting of the United Church of Christ. Nurture the Soul is a weekly webinar sharing practical, educational, innovative, and formational resources, engaging critical topics for local churches and people of faith. From cultural and community organizing to congregational leadership, worship and theology, to resourcing small and rural churches, from ministry with youth and children to wide-ranging justice issues, and featuring artists, authors, and key leaders, Nurture the Soul stays current on how the gospel is alive in this time. Beloveds, this is a space for connection, community, and nurture. Together we can bring our church and our community and world towards the world God imagines for us all. So join us every Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Nurture the Soul, and look for special offerings from time to time as well. We are always producing opportunities to engage, and you can find a full list of upcoming digital programming offerings at ucc.org/events or any of our social media platforms. And friends, if these conversations move you and what is offered here enhances your ministry or soul, please consider donating towards the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 4144. Your prayerful and financial support helps program like this and the essential work of the United Church of Christ. Thank you and thank you. So today we are offering a beloved artist and author who is known nationally and internationally. We are so honored to have with us Lisa Sharon Harper, who is the founder and president of Freedom Road, a groundbreaking consulting group that crafts experiences that bring common understanding and common commitments that lead to common action toward a more just world. Lisa is a public theologian whose writing, speaking, and activism and training has sparked and fed the fires of reformation in the church from Ferguson and Charlottesville to South Africa, Brazil, Australia, Ireland, and more. And Lisa's book, Fortune, How Race Broke My Family and the World and How to Repair It All, was named one of the best books of 2022. And The Very Good Gospel was named 2016 Book of the Year by Englewood Review of Books. The Huffington Post identified Lisa as one of the 50 women religious leaders to celebrate on International Women's Day, and Lisa is the host of Freedom Road podcast, co-host of the Four podcast, and author of her weekly column on Substack, The Truth Is. More than all of these things, Lisa is my dear friend. So please, thank you. Please welcome Lisa Sharon Harper. Lisa, it's so good to be with you.
It's great to be with you too, Tracy. I mean, what a joy and also an honor to be with this amazing community. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. So Lisa and I met, I'm not even going to try to guess the year, but it was well over a decade now.
Oh, yeah.
And we've had some wonderful adventures. We've participated in making beautiful things, I believe, and also gotten into some good trouble together. So, Lisa, I know you were a mentor to me, particularly early on as I was understanding what organizing was and understanding the role I played as an artist. You were so affirming in that and inviting me into spaces. And then I would listen to all of these things. You're an artist too. You think like an artist. And so as we've collaborated on events and conferences and book tours, I've so enjoyed just being able to relate and dream together in that creative way. And you've written a song, which we'll get to. We'll get to that at the end. We're going to talk about Fortune. We can talk about lots. But I'm just so thrilled to share this space and now share with our local churches. Welcome everyone who's joining us from across the country. And yeah, so are you at your home now in Philadelphia?
I am. I'm in my home. This is my office, my bookshelf. My dog is right across the way on the couch. So yeah, my mom is out at work, and so I have the house to myself, which is nice. She lives with me. I moved her in with me during COVID, so to make sure we didn't lose her, and we didn't. Thank God.
Yeah, thank God.
Yeah.
And you actually share a little bit about what brought you back to Philadelphia and where you're at.
Mhm.
Could you speak a little bit more to that?
Well, it's really interesting, actually. I was in the middle of writing, actually at the beginning edge of writing chapter 2 in Fortune. So Fortune, right? So chapter 2 was on the Lawrence line of my family. Um, Lawrence's Henry Lawrence is my second great grandfather. He was we mulatto was what they called him. He was black and white, and he was enslaved until he was about 6 or 8 years old, something like that, and then he was set free. And he and his three brothers all fought in the Civil War,
Wow.
right? And so his son, they all survived. His son, I should just go ahead and tell a little bit of his story. Henry and that part of the family was chased out of northern Kentucky, um, in order to survive the Klan. That's the family stories. They were chased out by the Klan, and they went literally across the river to Rockport, Indiana. And in Rockport, Indiana, circa turn of the 20th century, around 1910, there was a great I don't even know. I mean, pogrom is the word that comes to my mind, but there was a great oppression of Black people in Indiana and throughout the state, and in Rockport, including, and it became sundown state. It became a
Lisa froze a little bit, and that's okay. She was worried a little bit about her internet connection before we got started. So hopefully it'll click back on in just a moment. But what Lisa is sharing is actually written in this book, Fortune, which is going to be the focus of this webinar. And as is kind of the custom, normally Tracy Blackman is here hosting these special offerings. But Tracy Blackman is on sabbatical, which we celebrate and support. But she usually gets 50 copies of the book and gives them to people who claim them during the webinar. And so we are going to do the same thing. We are going to be faithful to that tradition that Tracy Blackman has started. And it is our joy to offer people who have joined us a copy of this incredible book, Fortune. And I'm going to ask my friend Laura, who is helping to support this webinar today, to put in the email address in the chat so that people joining can make that request. You just need to send your name and your address to Denise, and the email will be in the chat shortly for you all to do that. And we look forward to sharing the gift that this is. It is an amazing book. So I actually have read Fortune, and I'll tell you a little bit about it while Lisa comes back on. This is a book of tremendous personal research. What Lisa has done is meticulously tried to recreate and repair and put together the story of her actual ancestors, which, being a person of African descent in this country that enslaved people of African descent, is really quite a feat. And not only has she put together the story of her ancestors, tracing them from plantations in the South to Philadelphia in the North, she has actually uncovered the role that some of her ancestors have played well, the roles that our ancestor had as the United States started to define legally what race was. So Lisa, I see that you're back. I've been giving an overview of your book. We announced that we're doing a giveaway of
Oh,
50
wonderful.
copies, which we're so thrilled to be able to do. And basically, I've just been, bragging and
Mm,
celebrating the incredible, meticulous research that you did to put this book together. So, uh, what you were in the middle of sharing about why you're in Philadelphia is in this book, but
right.
we'll just come back to this point and you can pick up, this ancestor, you're telling his story and bringing you to Philadelphia.
So Henry Lawrence uh, fled from Rockport, Indiana, in order to save his life and also his dignity, and went north in the Great Migration around 1910, and he became a mail clerk in the Central Mail Office, and then a mail carrier. And then by the 1950s, the early 1950s, he actually became, and you can see this progression on the census, which is really amazing. He became the supervisor within the central post office in Philadelphia. And as the supervisor, now he's making more money. So in that decade, he also begins to buy property. And he bought property in this little area called Elmwood. It was actually like marshland. And I found also that most of my ancestors at some point lived near water and in a marsh, or like on top of a marsh, because that's where they let Black people live. Um, and so he was one of those ancestors on one line of my family where he was out in marshland and Elmwood. And that land was eventually claimed by eminent domain. So here you have, in this one family, at least 3 separate times where people lost their land as a result of oppression. And one of them was running north from the Klan. One of them was running north, again, further north, from really kind of white nationalistic, basically the Klan again in Rockport, Indiana. And then by the city of Philadelphia, lost his land. So when I started writing chapter 2, we were getting to the point. When I started writing chapter 2, I thought to myself, I need to find that land. I need to figure out where is that land. So I went on to, Google Maps, and I, looked for Elmwood, Philadelphia. There is still a neighborhood called Elmwood, but it's a different neighborhood now. It's not that they moved it to a different place, slightly,
Yeah.
adjacent. And but then I saw all these numbers on the map, and I realized, wait a minute, what are these? These can't be hotels. Sometimes you'll go on a map and you'll see a bunch of hotel prices. So this is not hotels, because it's looking like there's hotels on every inch of this land. And then I realized it was a Zillow map. And I had been saying I wanted to buy a house around that time. And so I looked and I said, I wonder if my grandmom's house is still, if there's anything in her neighborhood. Turned out her actual house was for sale.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I
Yeah.
couldn't believe it.
I
And
read this, but it
she,
was still, it was still wonderful to
yeah,
hear.
yeah, right. So she was, she lived in the same area where Hiram, my great grandpop, moved to once he was moved off of the land in Elmwood. He lives literally 2 blocks, well, 1 block from her. And my grandpop, his son, right? Um, so I eventually, to make a long story short, I found a house and I live 1 block from where they lived. And I felt Hiram saying to me, if I can do it, you can do it. And so it's my first homeowning experience.
Well,
And I moved my mom in with me, not only because of COVID, also because this is where she grew up. So there's been something deeply healing
yeah.
about being back on land where my family lived and cultivated community for nearly a century. And I've been away from it for a long time. And I cannot tell you how much now I understand what a fish in water feels like.
That's beautiful. Well, congratulations. And also I just celebrate the kind of generational resurgence and
Yes.
that you are participating in.
Mm-hmm.
So for everyone who's joined with us, please know you'll have the opportunity to ask questions of Lisa, and please use the Q&A function for that. I'll try to be moderating it and weaving those in as it's appropriate. But so there's a lot of books on race. It's, you know, there's been a rise in consciousness in through the Black Lives Matter movement and more. And your book stands out to me, both because just the research you did was incredible, and it's well written. It's a joy to read. I also want to mention that you have an audiobook that you actually read your audiobook, and that's I listened to part of it, and that was wonderful too. And it was so fun to hear your voice and you tell your own story.
Thank you.
But this book, it does at least two things that stand out to me in the world of like raising race consciousness. You you display or demonstrate so clearly how this is living in our bodies and impacting the people in our lives, all the way from enslavement to present day. And it's not just a theory or just ideas that we need to get. This is all playing out in our bodies. It's playing out in our families. It's playing out in our communities. And the second thing that really stands out to me about this book is that you so clearly trace the legal process of the United States. Because while white supremacy was already at work globally in colonization and the doctrine of discovery, the way that race is defined here in this country has a very specific context. And it's really important for those of us who desire to repair and be part of justice building to understand that. So I'm just so grateful, and we'll get into that. But I want to begin with, why did you write this book personally right now?
I chose to write this. First of all, I didn't set out to write a book. I set out to figure out, who am I as an African-American woman in the US, right? So until recently, really in the last maybe decade or two, really the last decade, we really haven't had, as African-Americans, access to information about our families, definitely beyond the brick wall of slavery. And so most African-Americans can barely even name their great-grandparents. They can usually name their grandparents if they're lucky, right? Like, and some people can't even name that. Other people can go as far as their great-grandparents. I was able to go as far as my great-grandparent because she lived while I was living. I knew her, right? Only one. I didn't know anybody else but her, but I knew her. I could name her Elizabeth, Lizzie, who I do write about in the book. And so with the advent of Ancestry.com and DNA science, we're now able to jump over the wall of the lack of documentation of our lives and the dehumanization of our souls that happened under antebellum slavery, and trace further back. Now, I happen to be incredibly privileged among people of African descent, in that I am able to trace back as far as 1682. And I was able to trace that far back because of the privilege of whiteness. Because in my family, unbeknownst to me, we literally stumbled on this. We had no idea. I can tell you a little bit of the story. I was on a Christmas, my mom and I, we bond over family history and searching for our family story. She was the first one to kind of dive into this in the 1990s. And I picked it up. I started, on Christmas Eve, I'm, going through and trying to find Philip Fortune, right? So Philip Fortune is my great-grandfather my mom had told me about. And actually, second great-grandfather, forgive me, two times great-grandfather. And he lived in New York City, but my mom said that he was from Virginia. So I'm looking and I'm trying to figure out, like, he was born during the time of slavery. Like, I was trying to find a slave master with the last name Fortune, because that's usually, how you can trace. And I couldn't find any slave master with the last name Fortune. But I did find a free little mulatto boy in a free household of actually, he was listed as black young boy, in 1850. And that's 11 years before the Civil War begins. So how was he free in 1850? So we started searching, and it turns out that that line directly descends most likely from this woman named Fortune Game McGee, who got her last names, Game and McGee, from her parents, Sambo Game and Maudlin McGee. Maudlin was a white woman who hailed from Belfast, Ireland, and from that area, and came on an indenturing ship in 1682 with her husband, George McGee. They were Ulster Scots. In other words, they were conscripted by the English to manage English plantations in Northern Ireland, y'all. Like this went way back. The whole plantation thing didn't start here. It actually started in Ireland. And so the Ulster Scots were conscripted by the English to manage the English's plantations in Northern Ireland. And there was an uprising around 1682 and 1683. In fact, in 1683, 12,000 Ulster Scots were killed in one day. They were locked in a church and the church was set fire. So around that time, Ulster Scots were coming to America to try to escape the Irish uprisings. And I believe George and Maudlin were among them. In fact, they were among the first. They came in 1682 before that great uprising, the major uprising. And so 4 years later, in 1686, Sambo Game, his Game is his given last name here, was boarded aboard a ship on the Gambia River in Senegal. And the reason I know that is two reasons. One, his name Sambo is a Senegalese name. It means second son. I never knew that. I always thought it was like this name of shame. In fact, when I heard that I had an ancestor named Sambo from 1686, I thought to myself, no, is my ancestor the first Sambo? Oh no, right? Turns out, no, he was not the first Sambo. It just meant second son. And at that point, they were not changing enslaved people's names. They weren't even necessarily giving them the last name of their enslaver, because Sambo's enslaver became Peter Doughty, and he never had that last name. I believe that his last name Game, sometimes you see it as Gam, and other times you see it as Game, G-A-M or G-A-M-E. It became later. I think it started as Gam, as in Gambia. It was an indicator of where he came from. It was one of the MOs of colonization and enslavement at that time. I have a friend who's in South Africa, Renee August, who some of you may know. Her last name is August because in South Africa, they would give people the last name that marked the month that they were brought to South Africa to be enslaved. So it was kind of a way of doing things, a modus operandi. So Sambo and Maudlin met at some point in that first year that he was here, very soon actually, and they had a love affair and they had Fortune, and they named her Fortune. And I believe they named her Fortune. She was born in 1687 because not too far after that, the laws had changed so that she should not have been enslaved or indentured. If she had been born in 1680, she would have been enslaved. And this is the reason why. It's going to get to one of the things I know you want to talk about, which is the law. In 1664, the second race law ever in the United States, in what would become the United States of America, was created. It was crafted in the colonizing government of the colony of Maryland, in the assembly. And in that assembly, they said, if any white woman were to marry and have a baby with an enslaved Black man, she too shall become enslaved to her husband's master. Wow. And her children will be enslaved in perpetuity. Now, by the time Fortune stands in a courtroom in 1705, she's brought to court post haste, like she's actually already been living I don't know, free or indentured or whatever, until she's like, what would that be? I think that's about 18 years old. She was born in 1687 or 14 years old. I'm so bad at math. So I think it's actually 18 years old. So until that time, she had been not indentured. Now she's being brought to court because of the status of her parents, the fact that her dad was Black and her mom was white. And in that interim, between her birth and 1705, there was a huge influx of people of African descent into Maryland, into the colony of Maryland. And that's because the technology got better. They now all of a sudden, since 1670, they actually had these ships that could go all the way from Africa all the way to Maryland and not have to stop in the Caribbean. So there was a huge flow of people of African descent. And with the growing population of people of African descent, the fear of people of African descent began to rise among white folk. And they said, we got to clamp down and make the laws more stringent. So by 1705, you start to see really heinous laws surrounding race and the calcification of racialization in the U.S. or in the place we would eventually call the U.S. So by that time, though, the law that said that Fortune should be enslaved because her mom got it on with a Black man, that had been changed. So now the law said if her mother is white, she cannot be enslaved. But if her father is Black, she definitely will be indentured. And she was indentured until she was 31 years old. So count how many years that was, about 14 more years, 13 more years. And this law was the second race law ever. The first race law came 2 years before the Maryland law in 1664. In 1662, they were trying to solve for another problem. You see, laws never just go poof. They don't just appear out of thin air. They always are created to solve a perceived problem on the ground. And in this case, the perceived problem was an onslaught of white women, usually Ulster, Scot, or Irish indentured servants, marrying enslaved Black men. And what they were doing is they were confusing the caste system that was developing at the time. So they created that law that I explained earlier in order to clarify the caste system. And it's worth stating that the institution responsible eventually for maintaining this caste system and for managing enslavement or indenture became the church. Mm. But 2 years earlier in 1660, for a different problem. They were solving for the problem of white men raping their enslaved African women and creating this huge influx of mixed race children running around on plantations who, well, this is important. This is the reason why I'm saying this. So mark this. If you have pen and paper, write this down. Who were beginning to take their cases to court. In 1650, Elizabeth Key took her case to court. Her father was Thomas Key. Thomas Key was a member of the House of Burgesses, meaning he was in the legislature of the colony of Virginia, the first colony on American soil. And in 1650, his daughter, Elizabeth Key, took her case to court because she started to realize, wait a minute, English common law says that no citizen of Britain can be enslaved. And citizenship passed through the line of the father.
That's right.
So if citizenship passed through the line of the father, and she says, my dad is a British citizen, not only that, but he's a leader in the House of Burgesses, then I shouldn't be able to be enslaved. And English common law said that if you were a Christian, you could not be enslaved. We can't enslave fellow Christians. Well, she had been baptized. So she took her case to court and won. And there was a flood. It was like they'd opened the floodgates. There were a slew of other cases, not only of Black folk, there were also Native Americans who argued on the same points and won. So the Virginia House of Burgesses then in 1662 says, whoa, we can't take all of this like free labor leaving. We're losing our bottom line here. So what do? They had a choice in that moment. They could have said, all right, so we're realizing that this system is not working. We're going to move to a true capitalist system. As evil as it is and can be, we're going to actually be better than what we're doing, which is non-capitalism and non-democracy. And we're going to actually enfranchise all of our people who we are enslaving, and we're going to create a system where they're going to be paid. They're going to be paid what their work is worth. They could have done that, and they actually would have benefited from it because they would have had more people to buy their products. Hello, somebody who actually had money to buy their products, but they didn't do that. Instead, what they did was they said, citizenship shall heretofore be determined through the line of the mother in perpetuity.
Yeah.
So now if your mother is enslaved, by law, you are enslaved. And if you are enslaved, you are not a citizen. It's like a dog chasing its tail kind of an argument, but it won the day. And it's that law that came 2 years before the Maryland law that ensnared Fortune. That law created race-based slavery in America.
Amazing. You write very succinctly in the book about this, and it's just such a valuable reference to have. So thank you. And I also want to share what you said about laws being implemented to fix a perceived problem. Happened, it's happened across our history, and not just with formerly enslaved people of African descent. So I in part because I also want to know who I am, and I only know my grandmother's. That's it. And one of my grandmothers is indigenous Tagalog and born in the Philippines, and through Spanish colonization ended up with the last name Garcia. And when the U.S. Colonized the Philippines, and they started that colonial process in the Philippines, so all of a sudden children were learning about Abraham Lincoln and all of our kind of mythology and things. And Filipinos were allowed to come to the U.S. because the Philippines was a protectorate, and a ton of young Filipino men end up in California and the West Coast. And there's a particular anxiety that arises because they feel American. They know the American culture, and they start dating white women, and it led to riots. It led to an onslaught of anti-Filipino legislation, anti-miscegenation, specifically anti-Filipino anti-miscegenation laws. So people can read your book and know that it just reverberates. You've done so much work about how it lives in your body. And you also you've already highlighted some of, your Irish ancestry, but you also have Native ancestry that was kind of unclear. And there were like myths and family stories, and then you kind of brought it up. And I just want to ask maybe if you could share, lift up maybe a couple other of your ancestors in this book that you were able to kind of bring to life in your own story and line.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, it's actually, it's really worth saying, I have to say, I do not claim membership in any nation or tribe. I can't. There's no way that I can. And that's on purpose. And that's what I found in doing the research, that the history of my family's intersection with indigenous communities was purposefully obscured by the United States, especially when it instituted the way that Native people would be able to be named Native in America through blood quantum or through membership on the Dawes rolls. Our family story says that we had people who were on the Trail of Tears, people who actually did make it to the end, but we lost contact with them And those who stayed behind, who hid in the hills in Kentucky along the route, then went for generations actually under an assumed white identity because they could pass for white. But you also see, and this is all actually in chapter 2, you also see that over those decades of the census, you see their identity shifting. After Civil War, they come out in 1870, and they are listed as mulatto. And very soon, I think 1880, they're listed as one is listed as white, the other one is listed as black. By the 1900 census, Henry is solidly black, right? It's like, wow, like this is the era when race in our current construct, the way that we currently see it in the post-abolition world, was shaking out this caste system of race. And you could see it imprinted on my ancestors' bodies. You also could see the ways that policies and systems favored whiteness or not. I see this especially in Henry's story around the military and his pension, which was heartbreaking when I researched it. And I think that one of the things that is so amazing about this chapter in particular, chapter 2, is that I started not knowing the end of the story with Henry. I had found 2 possible stories that could be Henry or a blend of them. And I still to this day cannot tell you for sure whether it's both of them, one of them, or none of them. Yeah. But what I do believe is that there is a very clear thing we get through these Henry's stories, and that is that the favoritism of whiteness you can see in the amount of Black men who fought in the Civil War who actually got their pensions, and those of European descent who actually got their pensions. There was a point in the beginning of right after the Civil War where it was pretty hard for almost anybody to get their pensions. But then they changed that law in order to make it easier. But when they changed it, it was not applied to people of African descent. And instead, the doctors had ultimate authority over whether they would get it. And most times the doctors would look at them in the way we know that they look at Black bodies now, and they don't believe they feel pain. So while this doctor that he's seeing over decades is tracing his demise, you can see it in the doctor's papers. One time he comes in and he's walking. The next time he comes in with a cane. The next time he's coming in, he has palsy. And the next time he can't even write his name. He has so much palsy and his eyes are deteriorated. And that's like literally, he's got to be about 80 years old or something like that. And that's like 1900. And they finally give him his pension. And he dies like 2 months later. It's like, oh my God. So Henry's story is incredibly instructive for me. It also helps me to see it helps me to understand why when I was in grade school, I had so many Black friends who said, I'm part Cherokee, I'm part Cherokee, I'm part, and they might have been, and they might not have been. But the mystery of it is intentional because the obfuscation of identity was intentional around Native identity, because the government did not want to be responsible for Native people. So their policy was to breed them out and to identify them out, to basically commit genocide on the paper. In fact, I learned after writing the book that in Virginia, there was a legislator who decided, or really somebody who was inside of the Virginia legislature or inside of the Virginia governor's office, it was his job to actually do the demographics. And he literally ordered that all of the people with eyes next to their name who were listed as Indian or listed themselves as Indian be changed to either Black or white. So he, just with the swipe of a pen, committed genocide. There are no Native people listed in, let's say, the 1880, or 1900 census in Virginia, because they were wiped out with the pen. So it's these details, the history, the evil, the modus operandi are found in the histories that we find when we research our family's stories. I want to share just one more story with you. And if you don't mind, I'd love to read it
Please.
to your
That would be
audience.
lovely.
Okay, awesome. So I would love to read the story of Reynaldo and Anita. They came to America from by way of Puerto Rico, but um, they were Caribbean, Black Caribbean, that settled in Puerto Rico because Puerto Rico was among the most inviting islands for people of African descent, likely because it was actually settled by an African conquistador, right? So they had long history of Black people in power. So they actually were welcoming. So I'd love to read this to you guys. In the midst of Puerto Rico's annexed and crumbling economy, Reynaldo Weeks found work in the capital, San Juan. By 1923, he was a Black servant, likely working in the household of a white land baron or politician. Situated solidly at the bottom of Puerto Rico's racialized hierarchy in an era permeated with eugenics theory, at a time when Jim Crow America won the Spanish-American War and consequently claimed Puerto Rico as its own, in this era, Reynaldo married Anita de Richardson, a Black maid from Anguilla, on April 5th, 1923. They lived in Santurce, near San Juan, with their 9-year-old Austin, my grandfather. Austin communed around a bomba drum with his Santurce neighbors, all of them annexed Americans without the full rights of citizenship. He watched adults dance out the oppression heaped upon their Black backs by San Juan's white ruling class. He bore witness as his neighbors offered their bodies to the bomba beat for cleansing, for healing. Santurce is one of 3 major hubs of Black culture and community life on the northeastern coast of Puerto Rico, along with Carolina y Loiza. Much like South Philadelphia was the first northern destination for freed men and women in the post-Civil War era, Santurce became a primary destination for emancipated people throughout the Caribbean. When Reynaldo y Anita returned home from serving their white masters each day, they likely returned to a wooden home built on stilts atop Santurce's swampland. According to their marriage certificate, Reynaldo y Anita lived on Calle Loiza Street, a main boulevard that flooded each time it rained and washed out when hurricanes passed over. I imagine my little grandfather sitting cross-legged on the floor at Reynaldo's feet, huddled in a room with fellow Caribbean migrant neighbors, the rhythm of Santurce's bombasica, which means walking, feeling the air like a Black man's strut. The rhythm has a groove, a swagger, and elegance. It reminds me of my grandfather. Black Puerto Ricans under Jim Crow rule could not determine where they would live, where they would work, how much their labor would be worth, and they could not protect their bodies from exploitation or molestation. They were subject to the racialized boundaries placed on housing, vocation, and rights. But in the bomba circle, the beat beckoned their bodies to move at will, where they willed, how they willed. In the bomba, the men could plant their feet where they wanted for as long as they wanted. The women could shake their hips how they wanted. The dancers could freeze when they wanted, and the women would extend their arms like eagle's wings, gripping their handmade crinolines, and they would move each side as if telling the story of their soul's triumph that day with each beat. Chests faced sky, and shoulders bounced, and arms pounded the air, compelled by the drum. The bomba is pure power and dignity, exercised by people stripped of both. They pounded out their pain in the midst of the community, encircled and supported by all.
Thank you. What is coming to mind in that incredible scene of freedom is is what I've come to understand through the work of Ruth Wilson Gilmore, and that is that freedom is a place that we make with one another and with the land and with the resources that we have. And that really lends an amazing or a good segue to a personal question that I hope you answer as much as you're able to before we get into kind of the systemic, repair. As someone with such complex ancestry and so much living in your body and your family, as you uncovered this and as you have come to understand how it's still playing out in the world, how do you hold on or cultivate wholeness in yourself?
That's a great question. I think that one of the things that was striking to me actually when I was sending the book out for endorsements, I sent it to Mama Ruby Sales, who I call Auntie because she and my mom met back in the movement. They were friends in SNCC. And she read the book, and she was her words about it shocked me. She said that the unique value of this book is not actually in the pain that it shows, because a lot of books can show pain. But what this book shows us is a family that was determined to be a people for the race. That this was actually a family that figured out a way to fly above and through the mess, through the oppression, and figured out a way to fly. And that was striking to me that she found that, because I had not seen that yet. I was just writing the story. I was just writing what happened and what I imagined happened, given what I know from census documents and immigration documents and taxes and things like that, and what I now know happened in the era. But as I have taken her feedback and actually done some deeper consideration of it, the thing that really strikes me is that I am here. That we survived since 1682 on this land.
Amen.
With laws and wars fought to keep us enslaved. And when we won, new sets of laws were crafted and schemed in order to hem us in even yet again, like Leah and Lizzie, who were in South Carolina, who the laws that were established there after the Civil War, after the close of Reconstruction, said that there were only two jobs that a Black person could hold in South Carolina. One was in the fields, and the other was domestic labor, either field labor or domestic labor. Does that sound like anything to you? It's slavery. They were trying to reinstate slavery, and yet Leah somehow figured out how to own her own land. Toward the turn of the century, she had her own land in the early 1900s. And Lizzie said, I'm done with this mess. She left it all together. She up and left the only land that our family had known for more than a century in the Great Migration, and went north. And that's how she came to Philadelphia, first DC and then Philadelphia. And my mom joined SNCC right out of high school, literally right out of high school, and became the church outreach director for Philadelphia. So she was the person who got Stokely Carmichael the places where he preached. She knew all the pastors, and she also knew that almost none of them would have him speak after he did his Black Power speech. They were all like, oh no, it's too risky, right? So she has those stories. I didn't even know that she did that work until I'm writing this book. And that's the work I did at Sojourners. So it kind of blew my mind that it's in me. And that is the lesson. That is the thing that I learned more than anything, is that, some people talk about, past lives, and they wonder, where was I when, in the Egyptian times or whatever. What I've come to understand through tracing DNA is that all of my ancestors, Fortune, Maudlin, Sambo, Lizzie, Willa, Henry, Reynaldo, Austin, Ethel, they are all in me. So my body actually has memory.
That's right.
My body has memory that precedes my birth because their DNA is literally me. It makes me who I am. It is present. They are present right now. When I realized that, there was a grounding that took place. I no longer question who I am because I know them. I know who they were, and they are in me. And this DNA is carried in the world through different eras of time, stretch back 1,000 years. And African ancestry DNA tells me that my people, my matrilineal line traces back to the Yoruba and the Hausa people in Nigeria. Oh, maybe that's why I like fashion so much. Hello, somebody, right? Because the Hausa people are all about the textiles. And the Yoruba people are all about the stories. They have the story, the griots in the Yoruba.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So resilience comes from being connected to our stories, connected to ourselves and to our ancestors, and connected to God. And I found profound faith in my ancestors that carried them and that they had to navigate, because that faith both carried them, informed their just actions in the world, and created major obstacles for them. So it was Christian faith that enforced Fortune's indenture and two successive generations after her.
Yeah.
It was Christian faith that when Lizzie did come north, I don't think this is actually in the book because I found it out later, but when she came north, she first attended an Episcopal church, a Black Episcopal church. But when she went to that Black Episcopal church, St. Simeon's church, she was told that she had to be separated from her grandson, who was a darker skinned little boy in this Black church. Yeah. She had to sit in a different section because she could pass for white. She was light skinned and he was dark skinned. And so she left and she never went back. In fact, then she started going to the Baptist church down the street because they welcomed everybody.
Yeah.
So the church has been a mechanism of justice and a hurdle to be overcome, both at the same time.
That's right.
And our resilience has come from being connected in the midst of it.
Amen. Lisa, that's a beautiful note to end on. I want to continue to plunge, but I think I'm going to have to point people towards the book, because you just as you gave really practical kind of overview of what happened in our legal process in this country, in the race making process and the racialization of people, you go through some really practical things on truth and reconciliation and repair in the book. And we're not going to be able to discuss that further, but people just buy the book, Fortune, or get the book as a gift because you came to this space. The information on how to do that is in the chat. And I'd like to, when I want to close with you talking a little bit more about that story and what it means to fly, and talk about this song that you wrote in this music video. We're not going to be able to share it because we've had some technical difficulties, but I'll put the link in the chat, and there'll be a link on the YouTube video as it's posted later. And I also then, after, is when we close, I want to give you a little bit of warning ahead of time, but I would love for you to give a blessing to close out the webinar, something really a special place that you hold in my journey is that you preached at my ordination ceremony. And I just want to share that, everyone. Lisa, at my ordination ceremony, and your dear friend came to Charlottesville at that time to do that. And I remember the blessing still. So I'll leave that space open. So Fly, you started to talk about Mama Ruby sales and this, but what is this song?
So Mama Ruby Sales, when she wrote that in the endorsements, it, like I said, it kind of blew my mind, and it made me realize that there was that this question of what is the message of this book. There are several messages in it, but I think that one major one is that we must all learn again how to fly, and remember, for some of us, that we are people who can fly. You might notice, I think it's over my, oh, you can't see it because this is blocking it. There's the book, People Can Fly, right? The People Can Fly. It's one of my big, inspiring pieces of literature in my life. I love that story of the people who could fly. And so I was approached by Common Hymnal to see if I could work with them to co-write a song about justice. So we got together, and I happened to be going to the Children's Defense Fund annual conference, which takes place down on Alex Haley's farm. So talk about like Alex Haley roots. I saw roots when I was like 7 years old. I mean, my gosh, it's just like, or was that 9 years old? I was absolutely taken by that story. It absolutely shaped me. So to be on his farm, and then to have the Common Hymnal folks come to the farm, meet me, and sit on the porch in the rocking chairs, these little green rocking chairs that are out there, and we rock and write a song together. They told me in the very beginning, they said, close your eyes and tell me, what is the song that is trying to be born in you today, that's trying to be birthed through you today? And I closed my eyes and I asked Fortune, what is the song that you have to sing? What is the song that you have to say? What are your words that you want to say? And all I heard was, fly, fly. And so I just started to hum that. And then I just started to sing. And I mean, I went off, fly, and I mean, I'm not a great singer. I used to be a worship leader, but you know how you can do, right? So, but they picked up on it. And by the end of the day, we had a song, and it is Fly. And it tells the story. It tells the story of the lies that we are told, and how those lies serve a purpose, and how the truth can set us free as a nation, as a people, as the church. And reparation, repair, can give us life anew in a way that we did not know was possible. So it's a song about hope. It's a song about the call to tell the truth in order to have a repaired world.
Amen. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. Beloveds, this book giveaway is just for those of us who are gathered live here and now, which I hope encourages you to come into this space every week. With that being said, we're taking a break until Advent after this. So take some time to care for yourself, to nurture yourself in the communities that you're a part of. And we are preparing a wonderful Advent series, Praying Through Advent. And we're going to go through Fleeing from Herod, and plunge deep into the Advent series and look at where repression is driving people away from their homes now. We're going to look at the journey through the desert and give attention to the state of migrants and refugees. And we're going to examine no room at the inn and this housing crisis that is increasing, and how we can be part of God's love being born in the world. So look for that coming on Nurture the Soul. Right now, Lisa, I wish we were in person so I could give you a deep hug, but please receive it from me in spirit. And I ask you to give us a blessing as we end this wonderful webinar. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, I want to also just say that Fly is downloadable now everywhere, wherever you get, wherever you stream your music, you can get it. iTunes, Amazon Music, Spotify, all the rest. Please stream it today. That'd be really helpful. And share it if you like it. I want to share with you, as a way of a blessing, a couple of paragraphs from the last page of the book. There are two paths set before the oppressed. One path leads to rage, compounded pain, sickness, and death. The other leads to the beloved community. On that road, there is truth-seeking, truth-listening, and truth-telling. There is reparation and equity, and there is mercy, release. For the sake of my body and soul and the bodies and souls of my family's descendants to the 10th generation from me, I choose the beloved community. And for readers in European bodies, you also have a choice. You can continue the war for supremacy against the image of God on earth. You can resist God's beloved community, resist truth, resist equity, resist justice, and resist mercy. You can try to maintain your space at the top of a crumbling racial hierarchy. You won't be there long. You are already in the global minority, and within one generation, you will be in the minority in the United States as well. And when that day comes, you can wage war, or you can lean into truth, lean into repentance and repair, and allow yourselves to be released, forgiven. Only then can we find a new way of being together in the world. And I can almost hear my 7th great-grandmother, Fortune Game McGee, who walked this land 10 generations ago and absorbed the wrath of its first race, gender, and citizenship laws into her traumatized body. And in my mind's ear, I hear her whisper, "Yes, child." Amen.
Amen.